All right, welcome back to SportsLine. Travis Haney from ESPN in the hot seat tonight with us. He covers college football, has done it for a while in a lot of different places, has great contacts throughout the country. How much fun are we going to have as college football fans this weekend?
I remember when this weekend started kind of coming together a year and a half, 2 years ago, and we looked forward. We wrote this date down, this weekend down on the calendar, and it's here. And we are so starved for football that we would watch anything at this point.
Right.
But we get quality filet mignon level football right out of the gate. I mean, you got blue blood programs. I'm not saying they're on top of their game right now. USC's not USC necessarily. Sure. That's a 20th ranked USC, not a top 10 USC.
But I'm watching USC Alabama any day of the week.
Just see those uniforms and helmets on the field at the same time. Same with Texas Notre Dame. That's a blue blood type game. I mean, it is a quality opening weekend to the college football season.
It's awesome. It's almost a shame that it is opening weekend and not like week 4, though, because I would take Alabama and Murray State this weekend, just to see football.
You're talking about week 2. I wish that this was kind of stretched out for the first 3 or 4 weeks. I guess there's a couple more. Obviously, the game at Bristol, Tennessee, Virginia Tech, Pitt and Penn State pick up their rivalry. So there's a few games, but nothing quite like this weekend.
So what is the Travis Haney special for this weekend? What's the game that,
special?
If you can only watch one of this magnificent lineup, what do you have to take in?
I'm most intrigued, and I think the teams that are close to the top, the two that are closest, would be Florida State and Ole Miss. So that's the Monday night game, the Labor Day game in Orlando. Mm-hmm. So it'll be a pro FSU crowd, I imagine. But I think that is the pinnacle of good on good. You've got some decent matchups: Georgia, North Carolina, Auburn, Clemson, A&M, UCLA. So
that one's really intriguing.
That one's a good one too, and the wrinkle on that one being Noel Mazzoni, the former UCLA offensive coordinator who came over to A&M in the offseason. So you have a staff at UCLA that knows a lot about the way that this guy calls a game, and then you have a guy who calls the game who knows a lot about his old team. And so you wonder how all that matches up in a really important game for A&M too. We're probably going to get into hot seat coaches here in a few minutes, but Kevin Sumlin, a guy who's feeling a lot of heat, and they play at Auburn and UCLA in the first 3 weeks. So a lot of things can be decided beginning this weekend. 2
great quarterbacks in that game, or at least quarterbacks to watch for. Josh Rosen, the chosen one.
I don't know about Trevor Knight being great.
Trevor Knight,
he had one great game.
He's had one great game. He's obviously played in a lot of big games at this point in his career, and to me, he's a perfect fit for what A&M wants to do. Now, is he a 5-star guy like some of the guys they've had in the past? Probably not at this point, but he fits in well with what they want to do. And here's another big game when he's played well at times in his career right off the bat.
Yeah, and we're referencing, obviously, the Sugar Bowl game from a couple of years ago when he torched Alabama. But you're right in the sense that Kevin Sumlin very excited about what Knight brings in terms of leadership, stability at the position, things that they just haven't had. The chemistry of that team had been off really for a couple of years. So Knight steadies the ship as far as that goes. But I do wonder about week-to-week consistency. It was the thing that he could never really do at Oklahoma, the reason why Baker Mayfield ultimately won last year, that quarterback job, and the reason why he's at A&M. So I understand the reasons and things that he brings that makes Kevin Sumlin excited about him, but I do wonder if he can handle the rigors of the SEC week to week.
The other game I'm really excited for this weekend, and not so much because of the quality of play, because I think LSU should take care of Wisconsin fairly easily, but the game in Lambeau Field.
That's right.
I love Lambeau Field. If you're just a football fan, it is a special place to go watch a game. Now you throw a college game in there, and Travis, you know this as well as anybody. Those are 2 schools that party about as well as anybody. The tailgate scene outside of Lambeau, I said last night, it's going to be like Bourbon Street meets State Street Brats. And that, to me, is going to be the most fun atmosphere of the weekend.
Well, I think the convoy of LSU fans is already working its way up into the Midwest, into Wisconsin. Apparently, some are already out imbibing as we speak. So it's going to be
a lot of good beer in Wisconsin.
It's going to be a festive week leading up to this game. As you said, probably, I'd say, top 5 social programs as far as their fan bases go. LSU, I'd rank number 1. I think they're insane. And the fact that Wisconsin would be willing to take them on and compete in that competition, that beer fest, I think that would be as entertaining as the game, potentially.
Worst job in America this weekend is the guy who has to clean up the parking lots around Lambeau on Sunday.
Yeah.
That's going to be brutal. All right.
He may still find a couple of fans left lingering.
Step over some bodies. Thursday night, we kick things off here in Nashville. Big SEC game, and I don't think that's overstating it. They may not be title contenders, but Vanderbilt, South Carolina, to me, is about as important of a game as you'll see this weekend, and here's why. In my opinion, both of these teams have their sights set on about 6 wins to get into a bowl game.
That may be generous on South Carolina's end.
Well, they're hoping.
Sight set. Okay.
Sight set. Their goal, realistic goal. They're not hoping to win the division this year. They're not ready for that. But they hope to get to the postseason and get to 6 wins. You win Thursday night. In either case, you take a giant step, in my mind, to reaching that level. You lose, and it's a really steep climb for either team.
Vanderbilt's season in particular will be really, I think, defined by these 50-50 coin flip type games. So this game, middle next week, they play at Western Kentucky later in the season. Missouri and Kentucky in conference. Those types of games are going to decide whether Vanderbilt is a bowl team. And I think that it can be. You look at the defense, very solid last year. Could you get the offense going just a little bit? And the sense from the people around there, including Coach Mason, is that Kyle Shermer's ready to take a step. First full year at quarterback, a kid who grew up around NFL locker rooms. His dad has coached for probably a half dozen NFL teams in the last 10 or 15 years. They think he's ready to make that step. The offensive line is a little bit of a concern to me, a lot concern.
Jokes being out hurts.
Yeah, it's just, I was there at the spring game and just didn't really get a good vibe when you're talking about going up against the terrific pass rushers that this league has. Derek Barnett at Tennessee being one of them. So I think it's critical for Vanderbilt to get off to a good start. I don't think South Carolina is very good at all. I think they have a lot of work to do. I think people who are honest with themselves in that fan base and around that program understand that the personnel dipped significantly, that this is probably, along with Mississippi State, the least talented teams in the SEC. This is a game you got to win at home. Get the vibe going, get energy going into that middle game next week. That's going to be an important test against that offense with Brent Stockstill coming back for his second season. I think the impetus is on Vanderbilt going into this game. I think this is a moment when Vanderbilt needs to show something early.
Big game for Vanderbilt. How important is the game for Derek Mason? We talked about moving into hot seat coaches. It obviously hasn't been pretty the first 2 years, but it seems to me like he's on more solid footing than maybe some people might think going into year 3, given the record.
I'll be honest, and I would say this to his face. After a 2-win season in year 1, I thought there's no way this guy can get it together. This is a matter of time. And what I saw last year was a team that was very competitive in most every game outside of probably at Houston and the Tennessee game. Outside of that, they were very good in games, just needed some more help from the offense. I think the offense was like 105th in the country in yards per play, obviously not going to cut it. So I feel a lot better in terms of confidence in Derek Mason and that staff. And I do say staff because the changes that they had to make, he made a very compelling rationale to me, Steve, that when they came in, you think about the timeline, it was the middle of January. And they had 2 weeks to get things together for that first recruiting class. They just had to find assistant coaches. They had to find guys and get them on a staff, get them on the road recruiting. Didn't really get to set the staff the way that they wanted to. Going into year 2, kind of got some of that fixed, feel like it's in a lot better shape.
I give him a lot of credit for looking inward and outward around him after year 1 and saying kind of what you said. I don't know how he turns it around, keeping the course or the ship on the same course. And he looked at it and said, all right, I got to make some changes. And he got rid of some of the hires he made, basically said, I screwed up. That wasn't a good hire. Let's go in this direction. I think he himself going back and running the defense was a huge move for
Which
them.
I questioned that too. I didn't know whether that was the right decision. You very rarely see coaches do that, especially on the defensive side of the ball, taking on play calling. But they were excellent on that side of the ball. So I give them a lot of credit for what they've done. I don't consider him a hot seat coach. And you think about the periphery at Vanderbilt right now. You got a new basketball coach on the men's side, a new basketball coach on the women's side. Obviously, baseball is very stable at this point. I don't think they want to make a football change. Right. I think they want Derek Mason to be the guy. And presuming it's a bowl season, I think you're putting a lot of this discussion aside.
If it's bowl season, he's definitely there. He can't go 2-10 this year.
I just don't see that. I don't see that. This doesn't seem like a 2-10 team, especially when you look at the context of the East. Kentucky's not that great. Missouri, a new coach, not really very good on the offensive side at all. South Carolina, we talked about a first-year staff there and their deficiencies, we'll say, on personnel. This seems like a season that Vanderbilt can finish, fourth in the division with a 3-4-5 win type SEC season and make it to a bowl game.
And if they do that, they're going to be in a bowl game. If they're the fourth team in the SEC East, I think that definitely means they will be in a bowl game. How about Tennessee? I've been saying this for a while, Travis, that to me, the expectations have preceded how good Tennessee actually was for the past few years. And now all of a sudden, I think the expectations are spot on. I think this team is ready to take that leap. I always say this, when you're in the position Butch Jones was, where you take over a team that's really struggling and frankly mediocre, the first step is to recruit and up the talent level just so you can compete. That's step number one. Then those guys have to figure out how to learn how to win and finish games. That's step number two. Then all of a sudden you can compete and actually win those games. And I think the expectations were a step ahead all the time. As he was recruiting the first class and the guys were barely even on campus, people were saying, oh man, we're right there. We got the athletes now. Then as those athletes were on campus and you saw it, people were like, we're going to win now. But those guys were still really young and hadn't quite figured it out. I think we saw last year with some of those games early, they didn't know how to win at that point. And they lost some games that they shouldn't have lost because they couldn't finish. I think as the year went on, we saw a team that figured out how to win. And so now you have the talent and they know how to play and finish games. To me, that's why Tennessee is the best team in the East, hands down. They're going to be in Atlanta. I don't know which team from the West is going to join them, but Tennessee's going to be in Atlanta. And if you're in Atlanta, it's one game.
It's a one-game scenario.
It's a one-game scenario to get yourself in the playoff.
Well, your sentiment echoes much of the way that Tennessee feels inside the building. That last year was not the year, and that losing to Florida and losing to Oklahoma and losing to Alabama, as painful as it was, that it wasn't the season that everyone was pointing to. So the sense is that this is that season. And so what you're saying is the way that they have felt. I think you're probably right that people got a lot excited. and that's good. I mean, that's a passion, that's a hunger, and a desire to win when you haven't been in that position for the better part of a decade. And now you look around the field, and on both sides of the ball, you see all SEC-type performers at running back, at defensive line, in the secondary, the linebackers. You get a sense that this team is, in terms of personnel, is ready to compete for some sort of title, whether it's the division or the conference or make it to the playoff, that this is a team that's in that position. Where I would argue against you, though, is I don't know that it's proven that it can win those games. Florida being the game. Mm-hmm. Now, Tennessee would point you toward Georgia. They'd point you toward the bowl game. But until they end
Northwestern's not playing Florida
until they end that Florida streak, until the streak that has lasted an unbelievable 12 years at this point, until that ends, I don't think you're going to be able to really persuade me that this is a team that knows how to win. And really, we've talked about it all summer. It comes down to that 4-game stretch. Florida in what is assuredly an emotional game one way or the other. Then you have to go to Georgia the next week, to Texas A&M the next week, and then Alabama at home. And how do they manage that month schedule? Mm-hmm. Difficult game. I mean, a test of a game in the opener with App State, as physical as App State is, wants to run the ball. Virginia Tech, in this kind of gimmicky, unique setting, they're going to be tested going into that 4-game stretch, but nothing like what will that team look like going into Alabama, coming out of those first 3 games.
Sometimes we see, too, the battle of attrition in the SEC, going through those tough stretches of really physical games back to back to back like this. You remind me, 2 years ago when they lost that tight game in Knoxville to Florida, I swore off ever picking Tennessee in the Florida game again.
Until it happened, right?
And now all of a sudden I'm like, there's no way. There's not losing this year with this team against that team in Knoxville. So I've backtracked on that. Time to go to the phones. So they are still open, 737-7767. Marty, good evening.
Hey, how are you?
Doing well.
Vanderbilt, I want to talk about them.
Yeah, what about Vanderbilt?
I think they're going 8-2, man.
Well, they're going to have to go at least 10-2 or 8-4 with a 12-game schedule. But you think they're going to be that good, huh?
Oh yeah, with that defense, and I think the offense will get a lot better. So I'm looking for them to, put at least 8 wins up. Yeah.
Okay, that would be on par with some of the really good Franklin teams at the end of that. Is there enough there? Can this offense be good enough? Because I think the defense is going to be legit. But is there enough on the offensive side of the ball to take that huge step? Not just get to a bowl game as we were talking about earlier, but take that next step and be an 8-win team.
I don't know that I see it. I think 6, maybe 7 is the high end for this kind of team, just because the margin for error is so narrow on the offensive side of the ball. And I don't think they're going to ask Kyle Shermer to do too much. I think you're going to see as much Ralph Webb as you can, try and play really the Stanford model, to go back to where Derek Mason came from, and that's run the ball, take care of the ball, play good sound defense, and hang around into the fourth quarter. They had some elements of that last year, just couldn't put the offensive piece of the pie on the palette there.
Other than Tennessee State, I'm not sure they have a gimme game on the schedule either, because you talk about those non-conference games against Middle Tennessee and Western Kentucky. Outside of Power 5 schools, that's about as difficult as you can schedule. And for those two teams that have a bunch of kids who are local from around who probably wish they were playing for a Vanderbilt or a Tennessee, they're going to be sky high for those games. That's really difficult. Now, I think Vanderbilt should probably win both of those games, but it's not go in and walk all over either of those teams. So I think it's going to be a challenge for Vanderbilt each and every week out there. I think they're good. I think they can get to a bowl game this year. But that, to me, is why it's hard for me to see them take that huge leap and have an 8-win year or something, because there's just no gimme. And the chances of them slipping up maybe against a team that you think they otherwise would beat, I think is up there, because every game is going to be difficult.
They lost to Western last year.
Yeah.
And Middle played them tough.
And that was at home last year.
And Middle played them tough in the Borough. I mean, you've already seen them play against those programs. Western going to miss Brandon Doughty. Definitely going to miss a 6th-year quarterback. Who wouldn't? But you're right. I mean, there are no just sure things on the entire schedule, which, again, going back to Thursday, that's why opening up with a win, getting some momentum early, getting your players' confidence going early, that's why it's so critical.
Derek Mason not on the hot seat, though. He's got this program in a much better position heading into year 3. We are going to talk about some coaches who are on the hot seat and some of their quarterbacks as well when we come back. Stay tuned. More SportsLine on the way after this.